Okay, I would like to call to order the meeting of the Salem Planning Commission for January 27th, 2026. Would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Fott,
Here.
Commissioner Frybeck,
Here.
Commissioner Heller,
Here.
Commissioner Levin,
Here.
Commissioner Rhodes,
Here.
Commissioner Slater,
Here.
Commissioner Tev,
Here.
Commissioner Villarbrandel, absent.
Thank you. First order of business, I think we'd like to ask. Okay,
Commissioner Infante,
Here.
okay, we've had a request to slightly reorder our agenda, moving item 7.1 ahead of item 6, special orders of business. Any concerns for that? Okay. Okay, next item is any public comment for items other than, or agenda items other than our public hearings? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our consent agenda and the approval of the minutes from January 13th. And I can't look to myself for a motion, so
I'd like to move the minutes for January 13th.
you, second,
second.
you. Okay, can you please call the vote?
Commissioner Fott,
Aye.
Commissioner Frybeck,
Aye.
Commissioner Heller,
Aye.
Commissioner Levine, Commissioner Rhodes,
Aye.
Commissioner Slater,
Aye.
Commissioner Tev,
Aye.
Commissioner Infante,
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you. And next item would be public hearings, which we have none. And moving on to our now information reports, the Natural Floodplain Functions Plan.
Thank you. Let me just get set up here. Oh, great. Thank you. My name is Laurel Christian. I'm an infrastructure planner with the City of Salem, and I'm here with Ken Beerley from the Glen Gibson Watershed Council. He's the chair, and he was our consultant on this project. We also have Robin Dahlke, the city's floodplain administrator, and we are here to present on the draft natural floodplain functions plan and floodplain species assessment. Quick overview, we're going to talk a little bit background on Salem area floodplains and flooding in Salem, and then I'll turn it over to Ken, who will kind of talk about creation of the natural floodplain functions plan and some of the elements that go into that, the floodplain species assessment, specific recovery plans, and specific action recommendations that are within the plan. And then I'll talk a little bit just about our floodplain management plan and program and the community rating system. So within Salem, there are over 4,000 acres of regulated floodplains. The Special Flood Hazard Area, or we'll refer to it as SFHA, are areas that are mapped by FEMA through a flood insurance study and are expected to have a 1% chance annually of flooding. The community adopts the flood insurance study and is required to regulate development in those areas in order to be eligible for federally backed flood insurance and flood disaster relief. And then Salem has adopted locally floodplains, which are known as interim flood hazard areas, or IFHA. Those are locally adopted with the initial purpose of the IFHA was to protect people and property from flooding in areas where Salem has identified that we know flooding occurs. But those areas were not necessarily mapped by FEMA. So the city performed some studies and did some mapping and locally adopted those areas as well. So those are reflected on this map. We have a few additional IFHA study areas that are pending adoption. The majority of undeveloped SFHA is under public ownership within Minto Brown Island Park and Wallace Marine Park, and that equates to approximately 1,600 acres. We have approximately 800 acres of undeveloped land zoned for residential, mixed use, commercial, or industrial development. All new development within the floodplain is required to obtain a floodplain development permit through the Development Services Division. These permits not only look at protection for structures, but also now require floodplain mitigation assessments that review development impacts to habitat for endangered species and to ensure those impacts are adequately mitigated. When we talk about floodplains, we do like to remind people that Salem has historically flooded over the years, and I've added some historical images here. The largest flood on the Willamette River of record was in 1861. The next significant flood occurred in 1890. In more recent years, we've seen flooding in 1960s, 70s, 80s, 2012, and 2015. In December of last year, we had an approximate 10-year flood event on Mill Creek, which is a flood event that has a 10% chance of occurring in any given year. This event impacted State Street Corridor and the abutting residential neighborhood, though it was a relatively small event when you think about flooding in Salem holistically. So now I would like to pass it over to Ken, again with the Glenn Gibson Watershed Council, who will walk us through the Natural Floodplain Functions Plan.
Thank you very much, Laurel. I noticed that none of you are old enough to have experienced the 1964 flood. I was coming back from Corvallis at Oregon State University, had to drive to Salem to cross the Willamette River to go east to Central Oregon where I lived. And since Sandy Am was blown out, I had to go clear up through over Mount Hood to get there. So flooding does occur. It occurs naturally and occurs regularly. But there's a significant amount of adjustment following. There's a recent lawsuit against the Federal Emergency Management Agency for not considering endangered species in the implementation of the National Flood Insurance Program. In Oregon, that lawsuit was started in 2009 dominantly by the Portland Audubon Society at the time, and there's been significant back and forth about in the intervening years. In 2010, the parties had a settlement agreement, and they FEMA agreed to consult with the National Marine Fishery Service about the effects of implementing the National Flood Insurance Program and upgrade mapping, and look at the community rating system as it relates to encouragement or discouragement of development activity within floodplains. It took until 2016 for National Marine Fishery Service to develop a biological opinion, and they concluded that the National Flood Insurance Program would jeopardize endangered salmon and steelhead species in the Willamette River or Willamette Basin, or in Oregon, let's put it that way. Since that time, FEMA has been working to implement reasonable and prudent alternatives that were identified by the National Marine Fisheries Service, and to ensure that local permits that are issued by local governments do not authorize activities that contribute to the loss of salmon habitat. Concurrently, and this is the part that we'll be focusing on, concurrently, the National Marine Fisheries Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, particularly the Flood Insurance Program, develop community rating system criteria to incentivize communities that participate in the community rating system that would reduce flood insurance if they would raise awareness of the likelihood of impact to endangered species, and further to develop plans that would help recovery of those species. So this is a voluntary program, not a regulatory program. And I think it's important to be clearly aware of those distinctions. The legal battle continues. And as recently as August of 2025, FEMA issued a draft environmental impact statement and an Oregon implementation plan for the integration of the regulatory integration of the floodplain insurance program and the Endangered Species Act. So there is an ongoing issue. The city has developed ordinances to deal with that in an interim. But what we're talking about now, and the two documents that you are reviewing are the voluntary incentive program proposed by FEMA for CRS credits. And it's developed using guidance that was developed by the federal agencies. This guidance is available that was developed in 2020. And we followed the guidance to our best ability and recognizing the opportunity to enhance Salem's community ratings. The Glen Gibson Creek Watershed Council applied for grants to both the City of Salem and to the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board to develop these two plans. They were in the work plan for the City of Salem's floodplain management program. We identified that as a possibility. We had some unique resources that would be available to put this kind of information available. And so we applied for and were fortunately granted those grant funds to conduct this work. Both the floodplain species assessment and floodplain plan were developed under the written guidance that was provided by the federal government. And it's important to remember this is not a requirement for the city to conduct. In fact, few communities have taken this opportunity to address listed species and their habitats in floodplains. But it's also important to remember that the required approach from the federal EIS has not been determined at this time. Taking these kinds of voluntary actions will put the city in a very good stead, regardless of what comes out of the EIS process. And again, to emphasize that this is a voluntary approach, the city, and the effect of improving the community rating system reduces the cost of flood insurance for residents of the city. So there are two pieces to this puzzle. One is a floodplain species assessment. It is simply an informative document that compiles a list of all species that occur or likely to occur within the floodplains of the community. We use the federal guidance has databases and mapping of critical habitat. We used that information. We went to Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. We used the Oregon Natural Heritage Database and to generate a list of species that were used in the assessment. The draft was reviewed by National Marine Fisheries Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife for accuracy. And that document, the City of Salem Floodplain Species Assessment was completed in January of 2025. And from that, the guidance provides direction to select those species which the city has the opportunity to make changes that could lead towards the recovery based off recovery plans or other documentation of how the city manages the floodplains within their jurisdiction that might be affected. So from the list of species, it became very clear that the dominant area of floodplains that are affected, that occur within the City of Salem urban growth boundary, are associated with either the Willamette River or the Mill Creek or other smaller tributaries. The critical habitat for upper Willamette, Chinook, and Steelhead cover up to the 2-year flood plain of those streams. It's fairly significant. It includes the lower portion of Glen Creek, portions of Claggett Creek, portions of the Little Pudding River as well. That's fairly small area within the City of Salem. urban growth boundary. So one of the many issues that we struggled with in selecting species is a number of species that are critically listed for the Willamette Basin are wet prairie species. The Willamette daisy, Kincaid's lupin, butterflies that are associated with those, Bender's blue butterfly, Nelson's chickamauo. These are species that occur on wet prairie systems, and there are very few areas that would be available within the city limits, within the urban growth boundary. So we did not include those. They were identified, and specifically their habitats were identified in the species assessment, but weren't focused on for the floodplain plan. And so what we're trying to do is work from the recovery and conservation plans that have been developed for these species, identify those elements that are relevant to and within the authority of the city to try to address. So the floodplain species plan identified critical habitat, that's part of the requirements. And then we identified from the recovery conservation plans what might be done within the city. And it's important to recognize that there's a broad variety of floodplain functions. Floodplains not only store water during high water times, but they're really have a significant suite of functions, not just hazard reduction, but it has significant ecological values. Riparian forests are significantly important for a broad variety of aquatic and semi-aquatic animals and plants. The functions that have been focused on dominantly through the regulatory process have been flood storage, water quality, and vegetation. The focus on flood storage has been loss of fish access, because when these floodplains flood, juvenile fish utilize those so they stay in place, don't get flushed out of the system. They feed in those areas. Flood storage, water quality is the dominant effect on water quality is usually from impervious surfaces. That's one of the real struggles you have in urban areas, is the dominance of impervious surfaces. So reducing that is really important. And vegetation, there's a significant effort to maintain some sort of native cover on these floodplain habitats. So what we did was identify from significant literature a number of restoration activities. And if you look through the documents, there's a whole variety of them, some of which the city is already doing. The management of the Minnow Conservation Area by replanting or reforesting the floodplain is one of the activities that is significant, particularly as the information about the number of acres that are in floodplain are dominated by Minnow Brown Island. The reforestation that's occurred in that area is really important. The control of Ludwigia, an invasive species in the backwaters sloughs of Oxbow Slough and Willamette Slough. That's where the city cooperated with Willamette Riverkeeper to eliminate that is an ongoing restoration activity. But the plan includes removal of barriers in Mill Creek, looking at removal of the dam on Penitentiary Ditch, looking at an alternative for Waller Dam where the Mill Creek and Shelton Ditch interact. Looking at gravel pit reclamation for the possibility of creating habitat for northwestern pond turtle. Um, One of the novel ideas in the plan is to develop a floodplain mitigation bank by removing fill that's been historically placed on floodplains. And then allowing, if you look at the map of flooding in the city, there are a lot of isolated parcels where there's not connection between the river, but they do flood. If you could create a mitigation bank where there could be opportunity for people to pay for the mitigation activities, that's an unexplored opportunity. And in fact, the governor's executive order 2526 identifies creative mitigation banking as something that the state wants to look towards. So this opportunity identified in the plan may lead in that direction. It would require a significant effort on the part of the city to figure out what, where, and how much, and the minor things like cost. So there's a list of a significant number of activities identified by ongoing, near term, and then longer term. And we think that that they can have an effect on the species that we're concerned with in the plan. And I'll let Laurel finish as it relates to the floodplain management program that the city.
Yes, so briefly, I just wanted to talk on the city's floodplain management plan and program. We do have an adopted floodplain management plan that provides high-level guidance as to what a floodplain is, what its natural functions are, some of the history of flooding in Salem. It also provides action items for our floodplain management program. It's reviewed annually and then goes through a full update every 5 years. We do have a floodplain management plan committee, and it goes through council annually and through those 5-year updates. Our most recent plan was adopted in 2023 and contains 43 total action items. They vary from very specific items that further protect people and structures, but also includes things like public information and messaging, stormwater standards to enhance water quality, and then other incentives for floodplain restoration. There are 2 specific action items relating to the preparation of these plans specifically that we're talking about tonight. Those actions call for preparation of the floodplain species assessment and the natural floodplain functions plan in accordance with the CRS and federal guidance. And then I quickly wanted to talk about the community rating system program, which Ken and I have kind of both mentioned. The CRS program is a voluntary program which the city is an active participant in. It recognizes and encourages community floodplain management activities that exceed national minimum standards. The CRS program recognizes the community's effort to reduce flood risk, facilitate accurate insurance ratings, promote awareness of flood risk and insurance requirements, and also the preservation of natural and beneficial floodplain functions. I've listed a few examples here on the screen of management activities that the city currently receives credit for under this program. Based on all of the activities that we do annually, we have a Class 3 rating, which equates to a 35% discount on flood insurance premiums for FEMA-backed programs. In Oregon, Salem is the only Class 3 community, and across the country, there are fewer than 25 communities that have a Class 3 or higher rating. So we always just like to put a little plug-in for the CRS program. It really reflects that our floodplain management program goes well above the minimum standards, and adoption and implementation of this plan will also be an activity that it's credited towards further discounts, potentially at our next annual verification visit. All right. Thank you for allowing us to present this evening. Ken and I can take any questions that you guys have.
Well, thank you for that. It was definitely a lot and interesting reading as we were preparing for tonight. And I know for myself, I'm very pleased that we're being proactive in taking these steps and pushing for the voluntary program. Any questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Heller?
Or not, well, I'll speak up. Anyway, I wanted to thank you, and I've expanded my vocabulary from reading this. And it's excellent. It's just fascinating. And I just want to thank you for doing all this effort.
I will say most of the thanks should go to Ken. He
Okay,
was
Ken,
really
thank you.
Instrumental in drafting this plan, and we really appreciate the blankets.
This is actually, it is a complex issue, and we, early on, as we were developing the floodplain assessment, we met with many of the neighborhood associations and tried to raise awareness and develop some brochures and tried to bring awareness to it. But that's hard to do in the summertime. People don't think about flooding in June and July and August, but we did have some receptive folks in the neighborhoods who were interested in at least finding out what the floodplains and what the importance of floodplains.
Good evening. One of the comments that you made was about an interest by the state for voluntary mitigation. And the question that I have is for individual property owners. And the question then is, if this is something that is a state encouraged program or possibility, I'm also on the board for North Gateway Urban Development. And if this is something that would then fall into a approved program, then that's something that could potentially also be available to urban development funds, which would potentially participate in property improvements and contributions toward upgrades for utilities and conditions. So is there any formalization of the state program?
At this point in time, the executive order was issued, I believe, in October. They've started talking to agency directors. There was a presentation to the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board by the Governor's Natural Resource Office just this morning. They are in the middle of trying to figure out what the executive order means and what it does. The problem that I see right now is that it's idealistic. It doesn't have any additional funding with it. It's basically a challenge for the state agencies to work together. One of the ideas within it is to look at creative ways to do mitigation banking. And what would have to happen would be a specific proposal would have to be posed to the appropriate federal or state agencies to see if that could be piloted in Salem. But it's going to take a while, and right now it's more idealistic than it is realistic.
Okay. I will be very interested to watch and learn how that progresses, because I'm involved in quite a bit of property that potentially qualifies. And we are also representing several folks that have major parcels that are currently in rated flood areas.
Thank you for the question. I would also just add that, like with most planning documents, these are action items and things that we have to plan and prepare, code amendments and different things like that. So if we were to implement a mitigation bank, it would likely go back through a floodplain management plan committee and through the planning commission at some point, since that would impact development.
Just always, whenever the CRS program comes up, it always makes my brain think about how unfortunately, the consequence of all of our good work in, infiltrating water and treating pollutants and all the great things that come with like a great healthy floodplain is that we make it cheaper to build in floodplains. So it's kind of like a funny
Sorry.
feedback loop in my brain where we're doing good work and it's often city funds that are funding this work, and then private property owners get cheaper floodplain insurance. So I always struggle a little bit just with that problem in my brain. But ultimately, obviously, we want to do the best we can either way for this program.
And it's a good observation. I would respond in this way, though, that it isn't a standalone program. There are regulatory standards, and particularly the mitigation standards that were adopted last December or November are part of the backstop. And as I've learned over a long time, that incentives are good, but there also has to be a regulatory connection. And so you have a carrot, you have a stick. We're trying to grow carrots to meet the stick.
Yeah, thanks. I think of the 2009 lawsuit as kind of like the first step in the backdrop that we just got, and I'm glad that we got it.
Follow-up question. I'm aware of the process that the city currently has for construction in a flood-rated area where there are specific finished floor elevation criteria and other standards and requirements that are substantial. So the question that I have is, where are the city standards in relationship to what the potential state's goals would be?
I don't want to speak for the city, but I will. I think the best way to think about this is that the settlement agreement and the lawsuit on the implementation of the federal program, federal flood insurance program, that sets standards for building within floodplains that are adopted by local communities is what's at play here in the legal arena. And the environmental impact statement lays out 3 different alternatives. But what it will require is, previously, all of the standards were basically engineering standards. If you could build your structure so that it wouldn't flood and it wouldn't cause flooding to others, that was it. Now there needs to be consideration of water quality impacts, of vegetation impacts, and flood access for fish impacts. So mitigation on those 3 standards will be required in one way or another in the future, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was just going to add that last year in July, we adopted the floodplain mitigation assessment requirements. So we have like you said, our typical, you build your finished floor 1 foot above the elevation. That's always how it's been. And so last year we adopted a new requirement. So all new development in the floodplain prepares a mitigation assessment that looks at how many trees they're removing, how much quantity of fill they're adding, how much impervious surface they're adding. And then they have to mitigate for that. So that was as part of FEMA's kind of pre-implementation of the full-blown environmental impact statement. When the full environmental impact statement comes out, we would likely have to do an additional code amendment, and that hopefully will provide some additional guidance also on that mitigation banking. And we could potentially implement that at that point or afterwards once a program is kind of vetted by the state and potentially FEMA. But those requirements are fairly new. We've had a handful of permits so far that have done the floodplain mitigation assessment. They don't really come up too often, but we've been able to work with people and get that mitigation done on site. For example, removal of trees and vegetation is replanting with riparian vegetation of trees. The impervious surface is mitigated by addition of stormwater treatment. So most projects now are triggering stormwater treatment anyways, but if you're a smaller project, you're now required to provide that. So for the most part, we've been able to work with the mitigation assessment requirements, the developments that have been coming in.
All right, I have a few questions if I could. Could we go back to the slide that shows us the maps that show us to what extent we have undeveloped floodplain in the city and the ownership status of that, and the zoning status?
The map that I had was just the floodplain in general, but do you want the acreages?
Yeah, please. I thought there was something around 800 acres of undeveloped floodplain. Is that, okay. And how does that 800 acres of floodplain, oh, well, let's go back and look at the ownership of that first. We've discussed this a few times in the Planning Commission and recently heard testimony related to floodplains or other environmentally significant lands related to the 2014 buildable lands inventory. So I'm very interested, and I think the buildable lands inventory may be a little out of date at this point, but it'd be interesting to take a look at the overlap between those 800 undeveloped acres and the buildable land inventory. Do we have any ability to have that conversation?
I would not have that information tonight, but that's something that we could come back with at some point.
So it looks like we have like 450, 480, something like that, acres of residential land in the floodplain. And is that mostly, do we know about where that is? Do we have any kind of concept of what we're talking about?
No, I mean, like Ken was explaining, a lot of our floodplains are not even hydrologically connected to a water body. There are a lot of overland flow areas. To do that mapping exercise, it's not something that we have specifically, that I have tonight.
Okay. My thought is it's helpful to be able to understand when we're talking about like really buildable lands for residential areas. Also, perhaps you can explain a little bit about hydrologically connected. So if we have a floodplain that's not hydrologically connected to a stream or a river, does that floodplain have the same value as one that is hydrologically connected? So perhaps if we can have that conversation, that would be helpful.
It would be my opinion that isolated areas that flood within the urban context often don't have the value of those areas that are directly connected to some sort of stream or other water body. There are a few isolated wetlands that are important, but they're relatively few and far between within the urban context.
Yeah, I would also add that the mitigation assessment guidance that FEMA has prepared that we use to review those mitigation assessments, it does require higher mitigation standards. Like if you're closer to a stream, it's 260 feet or 170. So I think it does inherently acknowledge that the closer you are to that water body, the more ecological value it provides.
I mean, it would seem to me that if we can map out and make a distinction between the higher ecological value floodplain versus the floodplain that maybe is disconnected and doesn't have the ability to be reconnected would be useful in the long term. I think some of these conversations about floodplain development and future plan for floodplains is going to kind of run up against various opinions about what are, are we trying to prioritize development? Are we trying to prioritize ecosystem services? Are we trying to prioritize habitat? The more that we can kind of come to an agreement as to where we have the values, the easier some of these conversations might be. So that would be one thought. The other point, I have a number of points that I won't make to make this quick, but I do want to point out that I appreciated the recommendation in here related to working with the state related to Mill Creek floodways. I think that's very important. I've had that conversation with the state a couple times over the past year. They tell me that they are very receptive and we continue to have these conversations. I will forward this report to them. I've been in active conversation. They've recently reviewed some floodplain materials from the city and have assigned a planner to take a look at this conversation. So I hope that as we go forward, if the city's in a position where it's able to kind of engage with the state, I think they're in a position where they're able to engage with the city as well. So there's some very good opportunities there.
You might wish to cite the Executive Order 2526, where the governor is asking to lead by example, state-owned and managed lands and waters. So as part of her executive order on resilient landscapes.
The more ammunition, the better. And my final comment is, how does the Oregon Conservation Strategy relate to this work? The Oregon has identified a number of key species that aren't necessarily federally listed species, but they're species of importance for the state. And I think one of the important things about the key species is that they are species that are not yet endangered, and so they don't have the same regulatory status, but they're indicator species. And so there's kind of a greater opportunity to intervene at this point. So can you talk a little bit about how Oregon Conservation Strategy relates to this discussion?
That's a very good point. The Oregon Conservation Strategy that was adopted in December of last year, a few weeks ago, includes the Willamette Valley, but it's very broad and it's a scale issue. And the species and the threats that they've identified are much more generic and a lot less specific than what was required for the development of a floodplain species plan. So they focused more on, and you're correct, there are a broad range of species that are affected, but most of it's affected by, it's wet prairie species that have been affected by development, typically agricultural development, urban development, et cetera. So we did look at that. We did have Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife review the document. They didn't have suggestions other than what we've adopted. But you're correct. But the difficulty is scale. They're looking at the entire Willamette Valley as an area. We're looking at a small subset of the Willamette Valley that is representative of a relatively minor portion, but a significant portion of the floodplain of the Willamette in the middle Willamette Reach. I don't know if that helps at all, but it covers it with a lot of words.
It was helpful. Thank you. That's it for me. Thanks.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you both.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to our special orders of business and the State Street Improvement Project.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Great. My name is Eunice Kim. I'm the Long Range Planning Manager in the Community Planning and Development Department. And with me tonight are Josh Adelman, the Project Manager for this project in Public Works, and Julie Hanson, the Transportation Planning Manager in Public Works as well. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the State Street Improvement Project that is along State Street between 12th and 17th Street. We're going to start with a little bit of background on this project and give some updates on kind of what has happened between all that background and now, and then Josh will dive into the details of what that project looks like. You should have a handout in front of you. I know it's really hard to see, but you can see a bigger version over here on the kind of the details of the design. So the State Street Improvement Project really has quite a history. It stems back more than a decade. It really came out of the neighborhood plan that NEN and Cessna did together back in 2010 2013 to 2015. It was the first time two neighborhoods came together to really work on a neighborhood plan. Nen is to the north of State Street between 12th and 12th and 25th, and Cessna is to the south. So this is really like the border that they share together. The neighborhoods, while they were doing the neighborhood plan, really identified this State Street corridor as an opportunity area. They wanted to see it revitalized into kind of a vibrant mixed-use area that was easier and safer to walk along, to bike along, and to travel along. And so they really identified this as a focus, as their neighborhood plan. That neighborhood plan was adopted by the city council in 2015. And then right after that, we were fortunate enough to get a state grant to really kind of dive into that State Street corridor to see what do we actually need to do to make that vision come alive. The State Street Corridor Plan was between 2015 and 2018. That project really had two main focuses. One was on the land use side, like how do we encourage mixed-use development that's really pedestrian friendly along State Street between 12th and 25th, and then how do we again kind of redesign that street and rethink how we can design that street. That project included a lot of input from the community, from business owners, property owners, the neighborhoods, the broader community. We did about 3 years of outreach. And so through all of that input, we came up with two results. One was really the new mixed-use zoning that you see along that street. It's the mixed-use 1 and the mixed-use 2 zone. Now it's applied along a lot of our corridors across the city. But the second one that we're really focusing on tonight is a new design for the street. The street design really focused on both bicycles, pedestrians, and vehicles, and how do we accommodate them really within our existing right-of-way. If you travel along State Street, it's kind of different widths. We are trying to figure out how can we accommodate everyone to safely travel through and around that area within that existing constrained right-of-way. Ultimately, the City Council did adopt that plan in 2018. The new zones are adopted, and then the new cross-section was adopted into the Transportation System Plan. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on tonight.
Okay, good evening. So once this was adopted into the plan, the first thing we needed to do was to look for ways to implement, to fund different elements of it from the transportation side. We were fortunate to be able to apply for and receive funds for a number of sort of spot improvements. One was the 25th Street at State Street intersection. That project was just completed this summer. Included a new signal, an island for pedestrians, and sort of reconfiguring that intersection. And then the second is a enhanced pedestrian crossing, which will be constructed in 2026 on State Street by 21st Street. It will be one of the flashing beacon crossings. And then, the focus of tonight is the 12th to 17th Street section, which was included in the 2022 Safety and Livability Bond Measure. And so that's sort of the big project that we have funding for. There's still more that will need to be done. Once this project is complete, we will have a continuous bike connections all the way from West Salem to and through this corridor connecting to 17th Street. So this map here shows the entire corridor from 12th Street out to 25th Street. As I mentioned, so the portion on the west, so from 12th to 17th, that's the portion that Josh will be going into more detail on that we have funding for. The portion that's highlighted there in yellow from 17th out to 25th, we do not have funding to make improvements to that section, with the exception of those two spot improvements that I mentioned, one at 21st and then the one that was constructed last year at 25th. This map here shows that sort of enhanced bike network. We're taking different projects and trying to put them together to make connections throughout our community. Not all of these are constructed yet, but these are all funded, particularly over in West Salem. You see in red, that is the Marine Drive, future Marine Drive, that was also included in the 2022 bond measure, that will have a separated bicycle and pedestrian path connecting to existing off-street trails in Wallace Marine Park across the Willamette River to the Union Street Bike Corridor, where we have the buffered bike lanes that are being extended through the bond measure, connecting to the 12th Street pedestrian promenade, and then from there to this State Street corridor. So since the time, so when we developed the plan, the State Street Corridor Plan, when we're doing these plans, we're at a pretty high level. It's a conceptual level. We're using GIS aerial imagery to try to figure out exactly how much, or approximately how much right-of-way we have, where the buildings are, things like that. And once we get money, we spend a little bit more time seeing how we can refine and improve the plan. So the plan that Josh will be talking about today includes, we found a way to add bike lanes in the section between 12th and 13th Street that had not been included in that original 2018 plan. We also were able to figure out how we could switch parking and the bike lanes to add additional protection to people in using those bike lanes. The 17th Street intersection, we have made some modifications to minimize property impacts and property acquisition needs. And then, of course, we have Americans with Disability Act compliance and stormwater compliance that needs to be incorporated. And water line replacement. Now that's not funded by the bond, but when you're going to be tearing up a street, you want to make sure that the utilities underground are in decent shape, and I guess the water line is not.
All right, so the goal of this project, as stated, is to create a vibrant walkable corridor with a focus on safety for all users. So currently, this is a pretty vehicle-heavy section. So we're, like we said, we're trying to add some more focus on pedestrians and bikes. So the budget for this project is about $15 million. Most of that money comes from the 2022 Safety and Livability Bond. A smaller portion, about $2 million, comes from the utility rates, and that's to fund the water line replacement. We began design in late 2024. One of the first things we did was hire our design consultant, HHPR, and we expect construction in 28 and 29. So project scope, there's way more going on here than would fit on this slide, but these are kind of the big ticket items that we have. This is a full street improvement project, so basically everything within the project limits between 12th and 17th, we're going to be touching and replacing. So that's resurfacing the existing pavement. We're going to be reconfiguring the travel lanes out there, new sidewalks, curbs, and gutters. We're going to be adding bike lanes, updating the ADA ramps and push buttons out there, putting in some new crossings for pedestrians. We have signal improvements at 14th and 17th Street. And then as we said, the new water line, we're going to be upsizing. So this is the same map that's over there and that was handed out. It's kind of hard to read all of the text on it, but wanted to give kind of a sense of the project size and what we're doing. You can see the new striping layout on there. Everything that's kind of black hatched, that's going to be all the new pavement that we're doing. All of the kind of gray and yellow hatches around the borders, that's where we're putting in the new sidewalks and furnishing areas. I guess one thing to note on this, currently at that 12th Street intersection, there's 3 travel lanes that come across that intersection. We're going to make one of those lanes a right turn only, so that we only bring 2 lanes across at that intersection, and that helps us to be able to add bike lanes in that 12th to 13th Street section, and take out a conflict where we're trying to merge lanes down to 1 lane to continue down State Street, but also have people backing out of those parking spaces there. So vehicle elements, what does this look like if you're driving through the area after it's all done? So like I said, pavement reconstruction, we'll have a new smooth road there. The big piece that we're doing is reconfiguring all the travel lanes. Currently, most of this is a 4-lane section, so there's 2 travel lanes in each direction. A good example of where we've done this before is on Broadway, between Pine Street and the Parkway. As you can see in the before picture there, there's a 4-lane section, 2 travel lanes each way. When we put the striping back, we put 3 travel lanes in, 1 travel lane in each direction with a center turn lane. This gives us the ability to add bike lanes. It also takes out a lot of conflicts with the vehicles. In the 4-lane section, you often get people sitting in that left lane, waiting to turn left. So that leads to rear end accidents and sideswipe accidents if someone's tired of waiting and they dive around a car. It also gives left turning vehicles on or off of State Street a refuge space to turn to, so they can do kind of a turn 2-stage movement. We're going to be doing signal improvements at the 14th Street intersection and the 17th Street. And then at the 14th Street intersection, we're going to be adding dedicated left turn lanes on both the north and southbound leg of that intersection. For bikes, currently we don't have any bike facilities on the section of State Street, so it's probably pretty scary to ride a bike there. We're going to be putting in buffer bike lanes with a 5.5-foot bike lane, 2-foot buffer. One kind of unique thing that we're going to be doing on this one is the bike lane is going to be going on the curb side rather than on the travel lane side. So an example of that is on Union Street. As you can see in that picture there, we have the travel lane, and then you have the parking lane, and then the buffered bike lane, and then the sidewalks. So one thing with that is this project, like we said, will tie into that Union Street, so it keeps a consistent kind of bike lane through there. That also adds more protection for the bikers because the parked cars can act as an extra buffer. And then it takes out the conflict of vehicles having to cross that bike lane to get in or out of parking stalls. Also for the bikes, we're going to be putting in a flashing warning sign at the 13th Street intersection. So that's where we have the east and westbound traffic that come together and merge onto the one-way, and that's kind of a unique movement. So we're just bringing extra attention to the bikes that would be crossing through there. At the 14th Street intersection, we're going to be putting in a bike box. So we have an example here from Liberty and Trade from the 2024 pavement R&R project. So at that 14th Street intersection on the south side, it's a shared use lane, but it's really wide, so there's room for the vehicles and bikes to ride next to each other. On the north side of that intersection, it narrows down to about 11 or 12-foot shared use lane. So this gives bikes an opportunity at a red light to get in front of the vehicles rather than having to merge in the intersection. And then, like we pointed out, all of the major intersections along this corridor now will connect to a different bike route. Pedestrian elements, so new curbs, wider sidewalks, ADA upgrades to all of the curb ramps and push buttons. The big safety feature for pedestrians is we're doing these curb extensions. There's a picture there from downtown. They're all over downtown. A big thing that does is it gives extra space and room for the pedestrians at the crossings, but it also shortens the distance that a pedestrian is in the roadway with a vehicle and limits their exposure to vehicles. And then we're going to be putting in an enhanced pedestrian crossing near 15th Street. So that will look like this rapid flashing beacon. This one is over on Lancaster, but we have other examples all over the city. To give kind of a visual feel of what we're looking for, like they said, the plan identified that we wanted this to be a safe, walkable, friendly corridor. So part of that is having these streetscape elements. So both these examples here, one is from downtown, one is from 2nd Street from a project we did over in West Salem. Both of them have a sidewalk running along the property side. And then we have that, what we're calling a furnishing zone. That's kind of a mix of landscape and hardscape. We know some of that landscape area is going to be filled with stormwater facilities. We're going to try and put street trees in where we can. But then there's also the hardscape area where the intent would be we could put street furniture, whether that's bike racks or benches or decorative street lighting. There may be utilities that have to go in there. We're still pretty early on in design, so we don't know how all these pieces fit together yet, but this is kind of the visual feel that we're going for at the end of the day. Next steps for the project. So we're going to continue design. That's going to take us a couple more years. We have to get to 30%, maybe maybe even 60% on some of this stuff, and then we can begin a lot of our right-of-way and easement acquisition and coordination. There's a ton of utilities out here, so we're going to have a lot of coordination effort with all the utility companies. determining what needs to be relocated and where things need to go. We're also gonna have to coordinate with other agencies like Chariots bus stops and make sure they're interacting with our project how they want to. And then future outreach efforts. So we had an open house for this project about a month ago for all the neighbors and businesses in the area. We're gonna go to future neighborhood association meetings. We have a project website. There's a QR code here for it. It's also on the fact sheet that was passed around. We'll provide updates on there as they come through with the project. We'll send out our normal project notification mailers. And then we have construction anticipated for 2028 and 2029. For your time.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to my fellow commissioners if they have questions or comments.
Well, while Ben gets his questions ready, I'll just say that I don't know how old my children were when this project started, but they were younger than they are today. And I do remember a time going to one of these State Street open houses, and I think I chatted with both of you and how this is going. So it's very excited to see it coming along. A number of these features are kind of in the urban designer fantasy list. So seeing kind of all these checked off in Salem is kind of exciting. What do you think is the process for evaluating how successful this will be? I mean, this is an expensive project. I know it went through kind of a lot of debate. These are designs that we haven't always embraced in Salem, and we're starting to embrace them now. I'm seeing them in other parts. But so in some way, this corridor, although it's very small and very expensive, has the potential to be a model for some of our other large corridors. I mean, if you look at our street system, we have a lot of potentially long corridors. So how is this part of, how are we going to use this as like the first step in moving forward, as opposed to just one project that we wrap up with a bow? I know I ask a good question when they debate who has to answer.
Yes, well, we will look at we have information on the traffic counts and traffic volumes in advance. We will look at those again after this, comes forth, is implemented. I did want to point out that the section to the east, so from 17th to 25th, right now, the adopted transportation plan cross-section calls for it to remain in its current 4-lane configuration. But the plan specifically says that the goal is to try to, be able to reconfigure that down. And so we will use the results of what happens here to inform that. In the meantime, of course, we are also updating our transportation system plan, and we are going to be looking at what are sort of the triggers for when we can consider doing a lane reduction, throughout the city on different corridors. So that timing of that, in terms of a before after may not exactly fit, but we are definitely looking towards that moving forward.
Totally answered your question. I'll take it.
Yeah, so actually, I attended the open house because I live a few blocks away from where the open house was. So I don't really have too many comments in addition to the ones that, I gave you. I guess I guess I can kind of summarize. So I guess at the intersections, right now the bike lane goes up and mixes with the sidewalk. I know the goal for the area is to be lots of pedestrians, lots of people riding bikes, lots of transit users. And when you get to the intersection, it can get a little confusing if the bikes aren't separate from the pedestrians, if that kind of makes sense. I've seen other cities, Boise, Spokane, Medford's got some of this stuff, where they, bring the bike lane all the way up to the intersection and then just clearly define which spaces. Sometimes that's with like a tactile warning strip. Sometimes that's with a curb or whatever works for the area is fine. But, I've heard from like blind pedestrians or whatever, maybe they're getting off the bus and they don't know that they're getting off a bus into an area that they're sharing the space with a bike. So I think, TriMet's done a lot of really good, interesting stuff with their floating bus stops, floating in water. They're separated from the bike lanes, like replacing the parking area with the bus stop. And just kind of making it clear for people with limited visual ability to get around. And then I guess one other thing that should be kept in mind is if somebody is riding their bike and they want to turn left at one of the two signalized intersections on the project. Normally, if you're riding a bike on State Street, you just behave like a vehicle. Now we're introducing protected bike facilities, which is great. But that changes how people on bikes behave. So now instead of leaving this protected bike facility, they are going to want to stay on the right side of the street. And so they'll want to use a left turn box instead of going across the vehicle lanes. So I guess I would just say left turn boxes at 14th and 17th for people riding on State. Not be space. I noticed you got a green box here on the south side of 14th. Don't have space for a bike lane on the north end, but maybe a box in front of the vehicle lane or something so people can turn left. I know the Ashto Bike Guide has a lot of really cool resources in there and pictures and stuff, but I mean overall it's a really cool project, and I kind of wish it wouldn't take so long to do a project, but that's just how it is. Yeah. Thank you.
Good comments. A lot of that stuff we're still about. Intersection. Left turn. Protected left turn we were talking about. Just looking into that, isn't it?
Okay, yeah, perfect. I would just direct you guys to look at, I think Corvallis just recently completed I guess ODOT completed a section of protected facility on Harrison that looks very similar to of here, and they do have intersections where things are very tightly constrained, and I believe they did install a left turn box, and they actually have mountable curbs instead of parking to serve as protection. And then other elements that might be worth checking out. So
Want to add two more quick things. One, in terms of the evaluation. Traffic analysis that predicts what, reduction. And then I also wanted to take the opportunity. Who is in the audience today, Kara Hall. She's been with us about 2.5 weeks. And so she will be working with her to help inform the development of the transportation improvements. Sorry, Kara.
So I just have to jump in and take partial credit for this because I was on the committee that rated our new, the candidates. And they were all very good. They were like within a point of each other. But I will just say that I'm very pleased with the outcome. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Hey, yeah, I'm very excited for this project. Thank you for all your work on it. Part of my commute, should I choose to go that way. So, so you mentioned 28 to 29 construction. Are you expecting a full 2 years or don't know yet? Would it be in phases? Yeah, I work out at a gym that's right on the McGillcrest project right now, and it's like, okay, how long? It feels like a long time when you go there daily. Yeah. Of course, yeah. Everybody wants that. And then my other question was just, I heard you mention streetlights, and is that within the scope of this project, or are you gonna try to maintain whatever streetlights are there already? So I am a big dark skies advocate, and there's a burgeoning group in town trying to work on that environmental and livability issue. And so I would just look forward to more details about the lighting in the future and how we can maybe ensure that the lighting is directed downward as much as possible. Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Rhodes.
Thank you so much. This is going to be amazing to drive down State Street one day and see all this. A question, you mentioned the acquisition to the neighborhood area and business. What's the impact on the local businesses with that?
Yeah. So a lot of it is, we're all.
Thank you.
Okay, I have just a question for you related to future development of the adjacent properties. And if you, well, with the full street improvement like this, which is very exciting, and I'm delighted to see that it's happening and that we're supporting our multimodal transit community. Some of the properties, if they were to develop in the future, will any of the SDC charges that would normally be assessed for street upgrades be going into a bank for other areas in the city that maybe are not targeted currently, or do you have any consideration on what that future looks like?
Might be better at this, but I will just quickly say that
Yeah, I could add, when the city does corridor projects like this, we don't credit SDCs. However, we do have an exception to say if you redevelop your property and the city has a planned CIP project, you don't have to construct those improvements. So they are benefiting some in terms of they don't have to do a boundary street improvement when they redevelop, but everyone pays the same SDCs regardless of whether or not there's a city project.
Thank you. Commissioner Frybeck?
I had one more question brewing. So I know the McGillcrest project has had a lot of impacts on the adjacent businesses. Like, people are visiting them less often and stuff just because of lane closures and stuff. Has the city, have, come out of that project with any lessons learned, or might change how they phase future projects, or, do lane closures or sidewalk closures or stuff like that that could impact something like this? Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you all. It's exciting. Okay, moving on. Our next special order of business is a continuation of a discussion at our last meeting for Planning Commission membership requirements.
Sorry, I'm using my phone. Megan has my laptop. Okay, so at the last meeting, we talked about if we wanted to recommend to council that we update any of the membership requirements, and we continued the item for commissioners to send in any thoughts they had. So there's a little staff report here. So Commissioner Tev and Commissioner Fryback sent their comments, and that's all we heard from. So I guess they can speak to what they sent, but Commissioner Tev said at least one environmental professional with a background in environmental science or engineering, natural resources, land management, ecology, or related fields. And then Commissioner Fryback suggested at least one transportation planning or engineering professional.
Can we add to that as well tonight?
Absolutely, yes. So just if you wanted to send it ahead of time, you could have, but you didn't have to.
I apologize, I forgot.
Yeah, so it's open for discussion tonight. Again, the council's asking if we want to make any recommendations on membership requirements. And I think we explained the background last time was to potentially reduce requirements. We don't really have a lot on the planning commission except for some prohibitions on, employment. But as far as any regulations that we have, at least one commissioner that's X, Y, or Z, we don't have that. So that's open for the commission if you want to make a formal recommendation to the council.
I would maybe add to our current list for having an architect or an architectural design professional to that list, and maybe just to clarify from our discussion last time that these are not necessarily requirements in the sense that they would hold up any appointments of people, so that we have a good cross-section of Salem throughout the wards and our demographics, but that they are for consideration, and that we make sure that we're trying to ensure that diversification of professional qualification as well as diversity across the city. So that would be my recommendation, and if anyone else wants to either speak to their submissions or add additional ones.
Yeah, I guess.
Mr. Fryback, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I would second Commissioner Fott's comment on, strictly just a item for consideration, not so much of a requirement. But the most common neighborhood complaint, I believe, on land use cases, other than that of the building itself, is the traffic and transportation impacts of that development. And so I just think it's important for somebody to have some sort of professional background in that field to be able to understand those complaints and possibly propose any sort of possible mitigation that could address them.
Commissioner Levin?
I saw the recommendations and suggestions and absolutely agree that a greater diversity in business and professional people will just be of benefit to the organization overall.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I'd like to
Please.
say, I also agree with Nate, Commissioner Levin. Diversity, it's very important and shows the city that we're trying to include everybody that, different professional backgrounds in different areas, and being fair and impartial.
Okay. I don't think we need any, do we need a motion on this?
Yeah, we would need a motion if you want an official recommendation to the council.
Okay, so with our one amendment to the recommendation and.
Yeah, I don't think there was a recommendation, so I think it would just be like a motion to recommend that council add these considerations, the two in the staff report, plus maybe an architect. And I don't know, based on Commissioner Levin's comments, if the commission wants to add that somebody with a building background. So right now we have a prohibition of no more than 2 people that are primarily engaged in development or building, but this is a minimum list we're trying, like a more, I don't know if that was a consent, just throwing that out there. Or if we just think we're always going to have folks that have a development background and that's not our concern, then that's fine.
I would expect that we'll typically have at least one with a development background. That seems to be the norm. Did you have a comment? Okay, please go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion that we adopt the recommendations for the selection of professional knowledge and expertise, and that we also make a point to focus on having a act as a member of the commission.
Second that.
I'll open it up for additional discussion if anyone has anything they'd like to add or speak to on that.
Sorry.
Yeah, no,
I did send in the email, and I don't know if the commission saw it, but you had talked about geographic diversity. So I did send the numbers about where the commissioners live and which wards. I'm not saying you need to do anything. The code already says the council should consider geographic diversity, but I just want to make sure everybody saw that. Or did anybody need me to share it, or?
Is that being included as a friendly amendment?
No, it's already in the code. That's something the council should consider, but at the last meeting I was asked and we said we would provide it. So I just wanted to make sure everyone had saw that. See, yeah. You didn't get that email? Oh, you got that email. Okay, great.
Okay, so I think that with the motion provided and the information just added, that I think we're happy with that.
Great.
Can you please call the vote?
Commissioner Freibeck,
Aye.
Commissioner Heller,
Aye.
Commissioner Rhodes. Aye. Commissioner Slater,
Aye.
Commissioner Tev,
Aye.
Commissioner Infante,
Aye.
Commissioner Font,
Aye.
Commissioner Levin.
Motion passes. Thank you. Back to our agenda here. Okay, next item under special orders of business is to review the draft letter to City Council regarding interviews for potential commissioners. Yeah, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. There was a motion at the last meeting to prepare a letter for consideration, so we have done that. And if the letter hits the mark or not, based on what the commission wants to do, or I guess you haven't technically voted to send it, so this would be your opportunity to say, yes, we do want this recommendation to go to council, and that this letter conveys what we intend to send to them.
Well, I've read the letter and agree with its general content. I think I did have one just revision on a tax, I think it
Oh,
would be.
sure.
It's really minor.
No, that's fine.
Um,
Happy to hear it.
hang on, let me just find it.
I normally send these kinds of things to Eunice Kim before I send them out with her reporter background, and I didn't have time. I did it at the very last minute.
It just is last sentence of the second paragraph should read, this process would enhance transparency and remove not only, because we don't have a second part to that
Yep.
sentence.
Sounds good.
Other than that, I think that was good.
I had another minor edit. I mean, I had I should have been a journalist, I think, but there's another typo, same paragraph, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7th line, diversity in perspectives. I would say that's diversity of perspectives.
Okay.
go nitpicky if you want. I don't know. I think it's
You-
also fine.
Do you want to share your copy here with your edits with Lisa?
Yeah, but then everyone would have to see it and vote on.
Do we have to vote on the exact language, or can it be a vote on the general intent of the letter?
The last time we did this, you guys voted on the actual letter.
Okay.
Okay, let me just do one more.
Yep.
So first paragraph, last sentence, not reappointments, be just inserting the word consistently interviewed by city council
Okay,
to emphasize that it hasn't been consistent, although that comes up later.
that's fine.
We'll leave it there.
Okay. Any other modifications, Commissioner Fryback? Oh, okay.
And you can just say as, with edits as proposed, and I'll go back and listen to them and make
I don't
those.
remember. So that. Yeah, so I move to send this letter to the city council with the proposed amendments by Commissioner Fott and
Do we have a second?
Second.
Call the roll, or any other discussion on that? Nope. Okay. Seeing none?
Commissioner Frybeck,
Aye.
Commissioner Heller, Commissioner Rhodes,
Aye.
Commissioner Slater,
Aye.
Commissioner Tev,
Aye.
Commissioner Infante,
Aye.
Commissioner Fott,
Aye.
Commissioner Levin,
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you all. Okay, back to our agenda. All right, our last special order of business is the Transportation Subcommittee report. Commissioners Frybeck and Tev.
Yeah, I can speak mostly to this one. So a little bit of background. So I think it was in January, Transportation Subcommittee was established to basically just look at transportation issues and other kind of transportation related items that are encountered, or like future TSP being one of them. And we met 7 times, and with the intent of just kind of having just an ongoing discussion of various transportation issues such as traffic calming. I believe we talked about the regional scenario plan and just prep comments for staff, among other things. The notes and agendas in here are all attached. The red markings are my notes and recollections of the meeting. I believe as under our what the subcommittee meetings are, they're considered public meetings, and so we just need to have an agenda and some minutes on the record to support that. The intent of the meetings were never to advise the planning commission on any sort of rulemaking or changes to the SRC. The intent was merely to, advise members of staff, or I believe I had put together a draft presentation that I prepared prior to the creation of the subcommittee to present to the subcommittee. And, I'm happy to finish that up and share it with the rest of you all. I've dropped off my radar since then, but we haven't met since last September. If anybody has any questions, there's a really good picture of me in this presentation. It's probably the first photo of me driving a car at Legoland. And I put that in there because not many pictures of me driving, but yeah, that's just kind of the gist of it. If Commissioner Tebbs has any comments or suggestions to change to these minutes that I drafted up, she's free to do that. Originally, it was myself, because Commissioner Slater, you were on there too, but I don't recall many meetings where they're at. Yeah. So, yeah, Commissioner Tev, if you have any recommended changes, or I think we just have to adopt this, correct?
I don't think you need to adopt it, just need to present it.
Okay.
And then I think we'll just pick a date for when you want to give your presentation?
Yeah.
And then to clarify after that, is it the intention that the transportation subcommittee will be disbanded?
Yes, yeah, so due to the coming transportation system plan updates and we don't want to task staff with the, you know, need to show up to a meeting where we just talk about, you know, traffic calming just off the cuff for an hour. We'll disband because that's just seems like a lot of staff load to for something like that. Yeah, we didn't really have a product to present. But yeah, I can certainly present that presentation that I put together and put some finishing touches on that. And yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, anything else on that before we move on?
Just wanted to say good job putting that all together, Commissioner Freibeck.
Thank you.
A lot of work. Okay. Planning Administrator's Report, Lisa?
Yeah, we don't have any items coming up for the next meeting, which is February 10th. So unless commissioners have an item they want to add, we would maybe, that was a no, that was an X. We would look to maybe cancel that meeting. We do have, if you saw on the fly sheet, February 24th, we are going to have the fire chief here and Ms. Kim again, and maybe someone from Building and Safety Division to talk about the single stair buildings as requested. And then Juliana Douglas, our Climate Action Plan Manager, is going to come on March 10th to talk about the Climate Action Plan and Municipal Energy Master Plan update as Commissioner Slater requested. All the items I have.
I have a question for the planning administrator. So in our last meeting, I heard something like the planning department is fully staffed. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, we had a new planner start yesterday and then in current planning, and we had one start 2 weeks before. Yes, so we'd had 2 vacant planner positions in current planning. And then we had our admin positions vacant, and you've met Megan, and this is Michelle Ambrozek behind us, who's our other admin person who will be staffing the Historical Landmarks Commission and the hearings
Great.
officer.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Can you walk us through we have a planning administrator, that's you. We have a deputy administrator, right? No?
Yeah, so we have Olivia as the current planning manager.
Planning
She
manager, okay,
manages the
okay.
planner ones, planner twos, and our zoning inspector and sign inspector. We have Eunice Kim, who's the long-range planning manager, and she manages the one long-range planner besides herself. And then we have Kimberly Fitzgerald, who's the historic preservation officer and archaeologist, and she manages the one historic planner. And then I manage the rest of the staff. So we
Okay.
have 9 planners, something. Yeah. 10 planners. Bryce is part-time historic or long range and part-time current. All the rest of the planners besides, Eunice and her staff person all do current planning.
So we have 2.5 long-range planners,
We have Eunice and we have another long range planner that works for her. Yeah.
and then we have a half-time.
Bryce does some limited code amendments. Yes.
Okay, so and then we have 2 on the historical program,
Yep. Kimberly's a historic preservation officer. She's the city archaeologist.
and then we
And
have,
then we have Jake Morris, who is a senior planner, historic planner. So he processes the land use applications.
and then we have 10 that are on active current cases, 9?
8 or 9 that do current planning. So the majority, I know people think of planning as, me or Eunice, because that's who they see. But
Yeah.
the majority of what we do in the planning division is process land use applications, building permits, that kind of stuff. It's all development related. So that's the majority of our staff.
We have 2 admin
Admin. We have a zoning inspector, a sign inspector,
and the zoning inspector. Oh, a zoning inspector
and a sign inspector.
and a sign inspector, who also did some tree work, is that right?
The zoning inspector does tree work, yeah.
So we have 2 inspectors.
They're code compliance officers / inspectors. So if there's a code violation related to developments that's in the zoning code, they handle that as well. So they go out to the site and someone has cut the tree that was supposed to be preserved on the plan, then they do the code enforcement for that as well.
We have about 18 full-time on the planning department, is that about right?
We have a GIS analyst who's assigned to us, but is technically in IT.
That's great.
Under him, one of ours, but he's retiring next month after 30 years, so.
Oh.
Very good.
Always something, isn't it?
Always something. Yes.
So that's very helpful. Thank you. I'm glad that we're at good capacity. It's great.
Yeah,
One-
we're always training now. Olivia's full-time job is training folks, unfortunately. And although we're fully staffed, we have a lot of junior staff. So we're not like all senior planners, tons of experience, know what we're doing. We're like, it's your first job out of college, planners. Let me teach you all the things, kind of, so.
I'm very familiar with that situation.
I'm sure you are, Commissioner.
Yeah, thank God for trainers.
Yeah. So sometimes for example, Jamie Donaldson was one of our planners that just left. She was a senior planner. She'd been here for like 5 years. She had a really high caseload, and we replace it with a planner one, first job out of college.
Yeah.
So one person does not equal one person, right? When you do that, so.
Right. I wish that person luck. Can you just say some word about our current dark sky standards, which I think we do have some. I know that Commissioner Tebb was interested in
We
that.
don't have dark sky standards. We have a lighting standard.
Okay, is it a lighting
Like
standard?
one, I think. I see Olivia going to pull it up, maybe.
And I have come
It's-
across something, so I know something
We
exists.
do have some standards about not shining onto neighbors' properties, downward shield lights.
Downward shielding
They're
lighting. Okay,
pretty-
so
pretty
that's the
fair.
extent of it.
Yeah, Public Works has their own design standards for streetlights and what materials they use, but for private property, we don't have.
Okay, thank you. That
Anything.
was it for me.
Any other questions for Lisa?
Did just want to clarify, you said that on the February 10th, we're not going to be meeting.
We
that
can
confirmed?
cancel the meeting unless the commission objects. Normally we'd ask the chair, and since that's been you tonight, Commissioner Thought,
I have no objection.
so we will cancel
Cancel.
that meeting and we'll not have a meeting. Before I move on, I did remember, since many of you said that you do want a printed packet, can we just get a show of hands who would want a printed packet? And then we'll make sure next time we have a meeting to do that. So we have Commissioner Slater, Commissioner Heller, Commissioner Fryback. Anybody else expecting to get a printed packet?
With the exception, I actually don't need it mailed. I would much rather be able to pick it up here.
Okay.
So
that's
I
fine.
read the materials online. I just don't want to print them all out so I can manipulate them here.
Okay, so you don't want it mailed, you want it here. Commissioner Fryback saying the same thing. Okay. Commissioner Heller, you want it mailed to your house to look at it in advance? Okay. And do any of the commissioners or do all the commissioners want to always have a paper copy of the agenda in front of you? Because we used to do that and then everyone was like, stop giving me this piece of paper. But now everyone wants a printed copy of the agenda. Okay, we can do that. Just the agenda for everyone else. Okay. Great. And we'll have to touch base with President Pierre Brendel since he's not here. Yes. Yeah. Okay, great. I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner comments for the good of the order? Right, seeing none.
The Wetland Subcommittee is meeting right after this. It'll be a different YouTube stream if anybody out there is watching, maybe 10-minute break and then we'll get that started if that sounds okay. Thank you.
Do we have any public comment? Nope. Okay. All right, with that, meeting adjourned.